It started as a moment of pure grace, a moment that would forever be etched into the heart of a desperate mother. When Pope Francis paused his procession to cradle her frail, sickly infant in his arms, the world saw an act of compassion. Cameras captured the tender embrace, the Pope's solemn expression, as he pressed his forehead against the baby's, whispering a silent prayer. The mother, tears streaming down her face, felt something shift in that instant. She had spent months watching her child struggle, clinging to hope as doctors offered little more than grim predictions. But in that sacred moment, with the leader of the Catholic Church blessing her fragile son, she dared to believe in miracles. She left Vatican City that day with renewed faith, convinced that something extraordinary was about to happen. For a week, she watched her baby with a mix of apprehension and wonder. At first, nothing seemed different. His breathing remained shallow, his skin still pale, his cries weak. But then, small changes began to surface. The fever that had tormented him for weeks abruptly vanished. The dark circles under his eyes lightened. His tiny fingers, once limp, curled with newfound strength. Family and friends rejoiced, calling it divine intervention. The story of the Pope's embrace had already begun spreading, with strangers reaching out to offer prayers and support. For the first time in a long time, the mother felt hope bloom inside her chest. But then, as quickly as that hope had arrived, an unsettling feeling crept in. Something wasn't right. A week after the miraculous encounter, the mother woke to a strange sensation gnawing at her stomach, a quiet but persistent dread. She glanced at her baby, who lay sleeping peacefully in his crib, his little chest rising and falling with steady breaths. But as she leaned in closer, her heart lurched. There was something different about him, something she couldn't quite put into words. A cold shiver crawled up her spine as she studied his face, his hands, his eyes. It was still her baby, wasn't it? And then she saw it. Something so subtle, yet so deeply wrong, that the breath caught in her throat. Panic surged through her veins as a single terrifying thought took hold. The Pope's blessing had changed her child, but not in the way she had prayed for. What had she brought home from the Vatican? The mother's pulse pounded in her ears as she reached for her baby, her hands trembling. His tiny body felt the same, warm and real beneath her touch. His breath was steady, his heartbeat strong, but something in her gut screamed that this was not the child she had carried in her arms every sleepless night, whispering lullabies through exhausted tears. She searched his face, her mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. Had the stress of the last few months warped her perception? Was it exhaustion playing cruel tricks on her? Or was it something far more sinister? The thought sent a chill down her spine, one so deep it settled in her bones. In the days following their visit to the Vatican, she had felt an unshakable sense of peace, almost as if the Pope's touch had placed an invisible shield around her son. Family members had called it a miracle. Friends had praised her unwavering faith, and even strangers online had reached out after seeing the viral footage of the embrace. Messages poured in prayers, stories of similar experiences, even warnings wrapped in well-meaning words. She hadn't paid much attention at first, but now every message, every comment about the mysterious power of blessings played in her mind like a whisper growing louder. Desperate for answers, she retraced her steps, replaying every moment leading up to that day. They had arrived in Rome nearly a week before the Pope's procession, staying in a modest guest house near St. Peter's Square. The trip had been a last resort, an act of faith when doctors had all but given up. She remembered every kind stranger who had stopped to admire her baby, every hand that had reached out to offer a blessing, every shadowed figure in the crowd. Had she been too trusting? She thought of the woman outside the basilica, a frail, elderly figure wrapped in a black shawl, who had gripped her arm tightly and whispered something in a language she didn't understand. At the time, she had brushed it off as an old woman's superstition. Now, The memory clawed at her. As she scrolled through her phone, reading through the hundreds of comments left under the video of her son and the Pope, one message stood out among the rest. It was different, not a prayer, not a blessing, but a warning. "Check his eyes," it read. "Look closely before it's too late." Her breath caught in her throat as she glanced at her baby, still sleeping soundly in his crib. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached for him and lifted him into her arms. His eyelids fluttered at her touch, and then finally he opened them. A sharp gasp tore from her lips. The room spun. Her baby's eyes had always been a soft, warm brown, deep and familiar. But now, staring back at her, they were something else entirely. Her breath hitched as she stared into her baby's eyes, no longer the warm brown she had memorized from the moment he was born, but something else entirely. They shimmered with an unnatural depth, almost reflective, like the surface of a still lake just before a storm. A suffocating sense of dread gripped her chest, and she forced herself to blink, to breathe, to think. Maybe it was the lighting. Maybe she was imagining it. But as her baby cooed softly, reaching for her with tiny fingers, she felt an inexplicable hesitation before pulling him close. Something was wrong. Something had changed. And she had no idea where to start. Determined to understand what was happening, she scoured the internet for any explanation. She searched medical forums, parenting groups, even obscure religious websites, anything that might tell her what could cause such a change. But the deeper she looked, the more unsettling the answers became. Some posts spoke of rare genetic conditions, but none matched her son's sudden transformation. Others whispered about supernatural encounters, unexplained phenomena tied to moments of divine intervention. One message, buried in a deep corner of an online forum, sent a cold wave through her body. Not all blessings come from above. Some open doors that should have stayed closed. She slammed her laptop shut, her hands shaking. It was nonsense, wasn't it? Just as she began to piece things together, obstacles started appearing small at first, but undeniably deliberate. The video of the Pope's blessing, the one that had gone viral, vanished from her phone without a trace. She knew she had saved it, had watched it dozens of times. But now, no matter where she looked, it was gone. Even her online searches seemed to be acting strange, pages refreshing before she could read them, links redirecting to error messages. It felt impossible, coincidental at best until someone reached out. A private message on her social media from an account with no profile picture, no name. Just a single line, "Stop looking. Before they find you first." Her fingers hovered over the screen, her heart pounding. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Who was watching her? She was just a mother trying to protect her child, to understand what was happening. But something didn't want her to dig any deeper. Swallowing her fear, she typed a response, but before she could hit send, the message disappeared. The account was gone. It was as if it had never existed. And then the knock came. Slow, deliberate, echoing through her apartment in the dead of night. Her breath caught in her throat as she stood frozen, staring at the door. No one should be there. No one should even know where she was. But someone did. And they had come for her. The knock at the door reverberated in her chest, as if it was coming from inside her own heart. She hesitated, every nerve in her body screaming at her to hide, to lock herself and her baby away, to run from whatever was coming. But she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she slowly moved toward the door, her hands clammy, her breath shallow. She looked through the peephole, but all she saw was the dark hallway outside. No one. Not a soul. But something in the pit of her stomach told her that whoever or whatever had knocked wasn't far. It was the same feeling she had gotten when the strange messages started appearing on her phone, when her son's eyes changed. Before she could even turn away, her phone buzzed again, startling her. This time, it wasn't just a message, It was a call. Her fingers shook as she picked up, heart hammering in her chest. Is this the mother of the child who met the Pope? The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, unfamiliar. It was a man, but there was something about his tone that made it sound like he knew more than he was letting on. I suggest you stop asking questions, or you'll regret it. You're in over your head. The line went dead before she could respond, leaving her in a thick silence that felt suffocating. In the days that followed, the paranoia started to creep in more and more. Every time she checked her phone, there was another strange message or a new phone number calling, leaving voicemails that were nothing but static. And it wasn't just her anymore. Her brother Mark, who lived across town, had started receiving similar warnings. Stay away from her, one message said, before it's too late. He didn't tell her at first, but she knew something was wrong when he showed up at her door, his face pale, his hands shaking. Mark had been the one who pushed her to go to the Vatican in the first place, urging her to take the leap of faith and reach out for help when doctors had failed. He believed in the power of miracles, had always been the more hopeful one in their family. But now, as he recounted the strange calls and messages he had been receiving, his usual optimism was gone. The more they talked, the more it became clear that whoever was watching them wasn't just after her. They were after both of them. She couldn't ignore the feeling that there was someone connected to all of this, something she wasn't seeing. The Pope's blessing had felt like a lifeline, but now it seemed like the beginning of a nightmare, pulling her into a web of lies and threats she couldn't escape. The more she tried to reach out for answers, the more the walls closed in around her. But the worst part, it wasn't just the threats or the disappearing evidence. It was the discovery she made while going through her old family records, trying to piece together any connection between her son's mysterious transformation and anything she could remember from her own past. Hidden in the back of an old journal was a letter from her grandmother, one she had never seen before. The ink was faint, smudged, but the words were clear enough to make her heart stop. The child who is touched by the Pope will awaken the door to something far older. You cannot undo what is done. Beware the ones who will come for him. Her hands went cold as she read those words over and over again, unable to understand what they meant. It couldn't be real. It couldn't. But as she looked up at Mark, who stood quietly by the door, she saw it in his eyes. He knew something she didn't. And it terrified her more than anything else. The truth was slipping through her fingers, and every step she took to find it only seemed to pull her deeper into a mystery, darker than she could have ever imagined. It was late, when it happened later than she would have liked to be up, but sleep felt like a distant luxury these days. The baby was finally asleep, and Mark had just left after another tense conversation that only deepened the dread pooling in her stomach. It had been days since they'd received those strange messages, and every day the pressure had only mounted, the walls closing in around them both. Still, there was no concrete evidence, no real proof that anything sinister was going on, just a creeping sense of unease and the inexplicable feeling of being watched. As she sat alone in the dim light of her apartment, the air thick with silence, she felt a chill skitter up her spine, an instinctive sense that something was off. The feeling wasn't new. It had been building for days, ever since Mark's last phone call had ended with him saying he felt like someone was following him. At first, she had brushed it off, but now, as she scanned the empty room around her, the tension became unbearable. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. She couldn't explain it, but she knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that they weren't just dealing with bizarre threats or strange coincidences. Someone or something was closing in on them. The phone buzzed suddenly, slicing through the thick silence. She jumped, her heart leaping in her chest. It was a message, but not from Mark. The name on the screen was unfamiliar, unknown number. The text was short, chilling in its simplicity. You're too close. Leave him alone, or he's next. She froze. The words seemed to pierce through her, reverberating in her ears. She could barely catch her breath as the reality of what it meant sunk in. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her son, the tiny life she had sworn to protect. Her hand trembled as she held the phone, staring at the message, but then something inside her shifted. It wasn't just fear that had taken hold, it was panic. The kind that makes you feel like you're suffocating, like the world is closing in from all sides. She couldn't ignore this anymore. She had to do something. She needed answers, and the thought of retreating any further felt like surrender. But just as quickly as that resolve sparked, a horrifying realization struck her. Mark hadn't responded to her last message. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it was an incoming call from an unknown number. Her pulse quickened, a dark sense of dread creeping over her as she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mark?" She whispered urgently into the phone. There was a long pause, the kind that seemed to stretch for eternity, before the voice on the other end answered. "You should have listened to the warning," the voice rasped. It wasn't Mark's voice. Her heart skipped a beat as panic bubbled to the surface, choking her. "He's gone now. And soon, you will be too." The line went dead. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably as she stared at the phone, a rising tide of terror threatening to overtake her. She didn't know what was worse, the eerie calm in the voice of the caller, or the fact that Mark was now missing, just like the threatening message had implied. She couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe this was happening. What had she gotten herself into? The walls of her apartment seemed to close in on her, the air growing thick and heavy, suffocating her. She had to find him. She had to know what was going on. But even as she raced to her feet, grabbing her keys and her purse, the feeling that she was being watched came rushing back, even stronger this time. Her gaze darted to the windows, the door, the corners of the room. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like there was nowhere safe anymore. Every shadow seemed to carry a hidden threat. Every noise, no matter how small, made her heart race. As she rushed down the stairs to her car, something stopped her, a sound. Footsteps, not far behind. She whipped around, her eyes scanning the dimly lit street, but there was no one. Nothing. She was alone, yet she knew in the pit of her stomach that she wasn't. The footsteps were still there, invisible but real, following her. The overwhelming sense of being hunted was suffocating, relentless. She reached her car and locked herself in, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had to find Mark. But as she started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a mistake. That she was driving right into whatever nightmare had been waiting for her. She drove for what felt like hours, until her car broke down on a desolate road she didn't recognize. The engine sputtered and died, leaving her stranded in the pitch-black night. The only light was the faint glow of her headlights, and the only sound was the beating of her heart in her chest. As she sat there, trying to steady her breath, she saw a figure in the distance. A shadow, moving in her direction. It wasn't Mark. The figure in the distance grew closer, its silhouette emerging from the darkness like a shadow stretched long and thin. Her heart thudded in her chest as she gripped the steering wheel, her breath shallow. She couldn't see clearly, but something about the way it moved too slow, too deliberate, sent a ripple of fear down her spine. The footsteps behind her had stopped, but this figure, this was something else. It didn't seem human, not in the way that anything she had ever known could be. Panic surged, and she fumbled for her phone, trying to call Mark, trying to call anyone, but the screen just flickered. No signal. As the figure drew closer, she saw it clearly, just a man, wearing a dark coat, the hood pulled low over his face. But there was something unnerving about the way he moved, something off in the way his posture was stiff, almost mechanical. A tremor of recognition ran through her, but before she could make sense of it, the figure stepped into the light. Her blood ran cold. It was someone she knew, someone she had trusted. Standing there, staring down at her with eyes that were no longer human, was her brother, Mark. But he wasn't the same. His face was pale, his skin almost ashen, and his eyes, those eyes, had the same eerie, reflective quality that she had seen in her baby. It was as if the light around him bent differently, distorting the way he looked. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, looking at her with a strange, unreadable expression. Then slowly, as if he were rehearsing a script, he spoke in a voice that was chillingly calm, too calm for what had just happened. "I didn't want you to find out this way." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. She felt the world around her tilt, as if the ground beneath her was giving way. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but nothing made sense anymore. Mark couldn't be here, not like this. He had been missing, and now he was standing in front of her, but he wasn't the brother she knew. Something was horribly wrong. "Mark, what's happening?" Her voice cracked, the words coming out in a rush. "Where have you been? What's going on? Why are you—" "I'm not who you think I am," he interrupted, his voice distant, almost robotic. The calmness in his tone was unnatural. "None of this is what you believe it is. It never was." Her pulse quickened, her mind scrambling for answers. "What are you talking about? You've been gone for days, and I've been—" "The Pope," he said suddenly, his gaze piercing her as though he could see straight through her. "He didn't bless your son. Not in the way you think. The blessing, it wasn't a gift. It was a transfer. Something ancient, something dangerous." A cold shiver crawled up her spine. What was he saying? "You've been too focused on the wrong things," Mark continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, as though the words were too heavy to say aloud. The Pope wasn't offering salvation. He was opening a door, one that should have stayed shut. Her thoughts spun. "A door? What door? What the hell are you talking about?" Mark's eyes flashed with something that was both sorrowful and terrifying, like he was caught between worlds. "I didn't want this for you. But you've stumbled onto something you weren't meant to find. That child, he's not just a child anymore. He's the key." The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense, but they felt like an echo, a deep, resonating truth that had been hidden from her for far too long. Her heart raced, a sick feeling pooling in her stomach as she realized that Mark wasn't just here to warn her, he was part of this. A part of whatever dark, twisted thing had begun with her son's meeting with the Pope. As the weight of his words sank in, the figure in the distance moved again, another shadow stepping out from behind Mark. A second figure, also wearing a dark coat, their features obscured by a hood. The second figure stepped closer, revealing themselves in the dim light. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized who it was. It was someone she had never expected to see here. Someone she thought she could trust completely. Someone she had leaned on in the last few days, her closest friend, Maya. Maya had been the one who had encouraged her to go to the Vatican in the first place. She was the one who had told her about the miracles, the divine blessings, the signs that led them to believe this trip might heal her son. Maya had been by her side, texting and calling, offering support as her world began to crumble. But now, standing there, beside Mark, Maya's expression was cold, almost detached, her eyes gleaming with a strange, unsettling intensity. "Why is she here, Mark?" Her voice was barely a whisper, barely a question, more of a demand, but Mark only looked at her with a gaze that was more pitying than anything else. Mia stepped forward, her lips curling into a slight, enigmatic smile. "Because, my dear, we've all been waiting for you." And in that moment, it hit her like a wave, drowning her in a flood of realization. They had known all along. They weren't trying to protect her. They weren't trying to help her. She had been walking straight into the heart of something dark, something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. And now, with her son's life hanging in the balance, there was no way out. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, and now it was too late to turn back. The weight of Maya's smile felt suffocating, as if every inch of air was being sucked from the space between them. She couldn't understand, it couldn't fathom what she was seeing. Maya, her closest friend, the one who had always been there when she needed advice, encouragement, comfort, how could this be happening? Her mind scrambled, trying to put the pieces together, but they refused to fit. The overwhelming fear, the helplessness, it was like standing on the edge of a cliff, unable to stop the fall, but knowing it was inevitable. Maya had been at the heart of everything, guiding her, pushing her, but for what? And Mark, her own brother, standing beside her, looking more like a stranger with every passing second, his eyes dark and unreadable. Her mind was racing, spinning out of control as Maya took a step closer, her voice low but eerily calm. "You're too deep in this now," she said, her words cutting through the thick silence like a blade. "You've seen too much. The choice is no longer yours. You either accept what's happening or you risk losing everything." Her hands trembled as she clutched the steering wheel, trying to ground herself in the moment. "What do you want from me?" Her voice cracked, a wave of raw desperation escaping before she could stop it. "What is this? Why are you doing this? Mark, you're not my brother anymore." Mark's expression softened, but it wasn't the familiar comfort she had once known. "I told you, it's too late. You're part of this now. You've crossed the line. And if you try to fight it, if you try to stop us, the consequences won't just be for you. They'll be for him too." He nodded toward her son, who had been eerily quiet in her arms the entire time, his small body stiff with tension, his eyes unblinking as they gazed into the distance. She could feel it, the weight of the threat in his words, the cold certainty that whatever they were a part of, it was much bigger than she ever could have imagined. Mark and Maya were in too deep, tangled in something dark and ancient. She had thought she could protect her child, that love alone could shield him from harm. But now, standing on the edge of a truth she didn't want to face, she realized that there was no safe place left. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't have to do this. You can't ask me to turn away from the truth. I need to know what's happening to him. I have to protect him." Maya's smile faded, replaced by an unreadable expression. "You're missing the point. This isn't about protecting him. This is about accepting him. About accepting what he's becoming." She glanced toward Mark, who gave her a look that said everything without a word. "This is bigger than you. It's bigger than both of us." Her heart pounded in her chest. The walls were closing in, and every step she took only seemed to push her deeper into this nightmare. She looked at Mark, the brother she had trusted with her life, and saw only a stranger, a man who was no longer her family, but a pawn in something she didn't understand. And Maya, she had been there all along, pulling the strings, weaving the web of lies that had trapped her. The air around her grew thick with tension as Mark stepped closer, his hand reaching out, not in comfort, but in a gesture that felt final. "You need to choose. Right now, we can offer you protection. We can give you a place in this, a safe place for you, for him." His eyes flicked to her son, and the chill in his gaze made her stomach turn. "But if you keep digging, if you keep questioning, if you keep trying to fight this, there will be no turning back." Maya, who had always been her anchor, her voice of reason, spoke next. Her words were almost too calm, too smooth, as though she had rehearsed them 1,000 times. "We're not your enemies, but if you make the wrong choice, we'll be forced to treat you as one. You can't save him. You can't save yourself. Not if you continue this path." Her entire world felt like it was spinning out of control, and the walls that had once felt like a comforting shield now seemed like a trap, closing in on her from all sides. She was being forced into a corner, given an impossible choice: accept whatever dark reality they were part of, and allow her son to become a part of it, or risk everything him to uncover the truth. The tension in the air was suffocating, and every nerve in her body screamed for her to run, to escape, to find a way out before it was too late. But deep down, she knew there was no escape. Not anymore. The path had already been set, and the only thing left was whether she would follow it or fight no matter the cost. Would she turn her back on everything she had known and loved to protect her child, or would she uncover the truth and risk losing him forever? The uncertainty was unbearable, and her heart shattered with each passing second, torn between the desperate need to protect him and the gnawing, terrifying realization that the truth might be far darker than she could ever imagine. The walls felt like they were closing in on Detective Ramirez as he stood in the dimly lit room, his hand trembling ever so slightly as he held the final piece of the puzzle in his hand. The file was heavy with information, with connections and names he had traced back to shadowy corners of the government, criminal syndicates, and extremist groups he had once believed were nothing more than conspiracy theories. But as he looked over the documents, something clicked. This wasn't just some rogue operation. This was the final stage of a plot that had been decades in the making. Every clue, every strange twist in the investigation now made horrifying sense. And the mastermind behind it all wasn't just some faceless figure in the shadows. No, it was someone far more unexpected, someone he had trusted. Ramirez's pulse raced as the door to the small room creaked open, and the figure he had been dreading to confront finally stepped inside. It was him, David Foster, the missing operative who'd been the key to unlocking everything. But there was no satisfaction in seeing him now. Foster wasn't just an operative in a forgotten mission, he was the architect of the entire conspiracy. His eyes were cold, calculating, as he strode toward the table, his footsteps echoing in the silence like the beat of a war drum. The man who had once been a symbol of law and order was now standing in front of him, a ghost of the past, pulling strings that had been set in motion long before this investigation had even started. "You should have known it was me all along," Foster said, his voice smooth but laced with a venomous edge. "You've been chasing ghosts, Ramirez. Every lead you followed, every question you asked, was nothing more than a distraction. I was never the one you should have been looking for." Ramirez's hand tightened around the file, his knuckles turning white. "What do you want? Why all of this? What's the endgame?" He had to know. He had to understand why a man who had once been a hero had turned into the villain. Foster's lips curled into a smile, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. "Endgame? You really think this is about an end? This is only the beginning. The shooting at the mall, that was just a test. A warning. But you," he pointed a finger toward Ramirez, his gaze sharp, "you're the one who pushed it all forward. You couldn't let it go, could you? You had to dig deeper. And now, you've reached the truth. But it's too late." Ramirez's mind raced. He had always known there was something off about Foster, something he couldn't quite place. But now, in the light of everything he had uncovered, it all made sense. Foster wasn't just trying to hide the truth, he was trying to control it. And the deeper Ramirez had gone into the investigation, the more Foster had pulled the strings, manipulating the course of events to this very moment. "You've been playing both sides, haven't you?" Ramirez finally spoke, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You've been pulling the government strings while orchestrating the chaos. This was never about a simple shooting. You wanted to ignite a war, create instability. You wanted to destroy the system from within. You're part of something much bigger." Foster's face darkened, the smile slipping away. "You still don't get it. This country was never meant to be what it is. We're on the brink of collapse, and all it takes is a few well-placed moves to bring everything down. But that's not what this is about. You're too focused on the what, Ramirez. The real question is who." He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Do you want to know who's really behind all of this? Ramirez's heart skipped a beat as the words hung in the air. The man he had been chasing, the man he thought he understood, was now offering him the final answer, the piece of the puzzle he'd been craving. But just as he opened his mouth to respond, the room plunged into darkness. A heavy bang sounded from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. "Someone else is here," Foster said, his tone shifting from confident to cautious. "You didn't think you were the only one, did you?" He backed toward the corner, his eyes darting around the room as if he were expecting an attack. In an instant, Ramirez realized the stakes were much higher than he had ever imagined. The pieces of the puzzle weren't just scattered around him, they were still being manipulated by forces far beyond his control. There was someone else pulling the strings, someone even more dangerous than Foster, someone who had been in the shadows the entire time. And then, just as he turned to confront the approaching threat, the door slammed open, revealing none other than Maya, the very person who had once been his ally in this investigation. She stood in the doorway, a gun in her hand, her face an unreadable mask. "I knew you'd find your way here eventually, Ramirez," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed a mixture of sadness and regret. "But you didn't understand. You were never supposed to know. You were never supposed to be a part of this." Ramirez froze, his mind reeling. Maya, the one person he had trusted, was the real mastermind, the one who had orchestrated everything from the start. It wasn't Foster, and it certainly wasn't just some external force. Maya had been playing him all along, guiding him to this point, manipulating him to uncover the truth, only to drag him deeper into the conspiracy she had created. In that moment, everything Ramirez thought he knew shattered. He wasn't just facing a corrupt system. He was facing a betrayal so deep, so personal, that it left him paralyzed. Maya had been in control the entire time, and now he was trapped. Before he could react, Maya's finger tightened on the trigger. "It's too late for you, Ramirez. It's too late for all of us." The last thing Ramirez saw was the cold flash of the gun's muzzle, and then everything went black. The world seemed to stand still as the blackness of unconsciousness began to lift, pulling Ramirez back into reality, piece by fragile piece. His head throbbed, a sharp pain shooting through his temples as he struggled to open his eyes. The room was unfamiliar cold, sterile, the scent of antiseptic in the air. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, drained of all strength. It took him a moment to realize where he was. A hospital. His heart pounded in his chest as memories of the last moments flooded back Maya's betrayal. The cold barrel of the gun, the silence that followed. Had he survived? Was it over? The door creaked open, and a shadow appeared in the doorway. Ramirez tensed, expecting the worst, but when his eyes focused, he saw Detective Harris, the one person he hadn't suspected. Harris was standing there, a weary look in his eyes, a clipboard in hand. A warning. "But you," he pointed a finger toward Ramirez, his gaze sharp, "you're the one who pushed it all forward. You couldn't let it go, could you? You had to dig deeper. And now, you've reached the truth. But it's too late." Ramirez's mind raced. He had always known there was something off about Foster, something he couldn't quite place. But now, in the light of everything he had uncovered, it all made sense. Foster wasn't just trying to hide the truth. He was trying to control it. And the deeper Ramirez had gone into the investigation, the more Foster had pulled the strings, manipulating the course of events to this very moment. "You've been playing both sides, haven't you?" Ramirez finally spoke, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You've been pulling the government's strings while orchestrating the chaos. This was never about a simple shooting. You wanted to ignite a war, create instability. You wanted to destroy the system from within. You're part of something much bigger." Foster's face darkened, the smile slipping away. "You still don't get it. This country was never meant to be what it is. We're on the brink of collapse, and all it takes is a few well-placed moves to bring everything down. But that's not what this is about. You're too focused on the what, Ramirez. The real question is who. He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. Do you want to know who's really behind all of this? Ramirez's heart skipped a beat as the words hung in the air. The man he had been chasing, the man he thought he understood, was now offering him the final answer, the piece of the puzzle he'd been craving. But just as he opened his mouth to respond, the room plunged into darkness. A heavy bang sounded from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. "Someone else is here," Foster said, his tone shifting from confident to cautious. "You didn't think you were the only one, did you?" He backed toward the corner, his eyes darting around the room as if he were expecting an attack. In an instant, Ramirez realized the stakes were much higher than he had ever imagined. The pieces of the puzzle weren't just scattered around him, they were still being manipulated by forces far beyond his control. There was someone else pulling the strings, someone even more dangerous than Foster, someone who had been in the shadows the entire time. And then, just as he turned to confront the approaching threat, the door slammed open, revealing none other than Maya, the very person who had once been his ally in this investigation. She stood in the doorway, a gun in her hand, her face an unreadable mask. "I knew you'd find your way here eventually, Ramirez," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed a mixture of sadness and regret. "But you didn't understand. You were never supposed to know. You were never supposed to be a part of this." Ramirez froze, his mind reeling. Maya, the one person he had trusted, was the real mastermind, the one who had orchestrated everything from the start. It wasn't Foster, and it certainly wasn't just some external force. Maya had been playing him all along, guiding him to this point, manipulating him to uncover the truth, only to drag him deeper into the conspiracy she had created. In that moment, everything Ramirez thought he knew shattered. He wasn't just facing a corrupt system. He was facing a betrayal so deep, so personal, that it left him paralyzed. Maya had been in control the entire time, and now he was trapped. Before he could react, Maya's finger tightened on the trigger. "It's too late for you, Ramirez. It's too late for all of us." The last thing Ramirez saw was the cold flash of the gun's muzzle, and then everything went black. The world seemed to stand still as the blackness of unconsciousness began to lift, pulling Ramirez back into reality, piece by fragile piece. His head throbbed, a sharp pain shooting through his temples as he struggled to open his eyes. The room was unfamiliar cold, sterile, the scent of antiseptic in the air. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, drained of all strength. It took him a moment to realize where he was. A hospital. His heart pounded in his chest as memories of the last moments flooded back Maya's betrayal. The cold barrel of the gun, the silence that followed. Had he survived? Was it over? The door creaked open, and a shadow appeared in the doorway. Ramirez tensed, expecting the worst, but when his eyes focused, he saw Detective Harris, the one person he hadn't suspected. Harris was standing there, a weary look in his eyes, a clipboard in hand.